Welcome back, everyone. We are excited to kick off our space panel. Joining us on the panel are Tess, partner at Bessemer Venture Partners, Jeff Crusey, investment manager at Seraphim Capital, Blair DeWitt, CEO of Lunar Station Corp. I don't think we have Simon yet, but hopefully he'll be with us. And we have James Powell, co-founder of Dawn Aerospace. Please help me to welcome our panelists. And why don't we start, if each of you can first define what the space economy is and what it encompasses in your opinion. Why don't we go ahead and start with Tess?
Thanks for having me, Catherine and Scott and the entire team. To me, the space economy, as a former aerospace engineer, I have degrees in the field and I used to work at SpaceX integrating its satellites with the Falcon 9 rocket. As a former aerospace engineer turned venture capitalist, it's the area I'm most excited about is pushing it forward. After the invention of the CubeSat, what's next? Decades of Moore's law exponentially decreased the size and increased the power of commercial off-the-shelf electronics to allow for the invention of the CubeSat, a new form factor that sort of flipped the model of sending assets into space. Before, it would take years, if not decades, and tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to design, build, test, and launch assets into space. And a tissue box size form factor, now called a CubeSat, really lowered the barrier of entry and open space for business. Excited for what's next, what will continue to open space for business, and what will continue to lower the barrier of entry, and investing in companies that are doing exactly that.
Exciting. Jeff, what's your take on that?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. I tend to agree with Tess. One of the way I like to think about it is with the democratized access to space, that we have mountains of data that are now being downlinked, uplinked, and back and forth. And that can provide us new insights in ways we've never have been able to before. So I like to think of it as a new data life cycle that we're seeing that really enable new economies.
James, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Hey, good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Really think about it very holistically as sort of a new frontier for humanity and a new place for a new economy sort of thing. It's kind of like, when the Western, when the British sort of expanded into America and the rest of the world, and a lot of other colonization happened, and how much that grew the global economy and how much that grew what humankind was able to do and achieve. And in many ways, this is that next frontier. This is new opportunity to do a whole lot of new things, use new technology to achieve new capabilities. And like the others have said, there's so much better access to that now. We think that's just going to keep on growing and growing, and it's just going to enable so much more.
Terrific. Blair, any additional thoughts?
Really just sort of reiterate that I see the new space economy as new territories opening up to commercial and other aspects of humanity that can expand its reach. And our focus on the moon, we see the moon as the 8th continent. So it's everything that you would expect to see, and finding a new piece of land is occurring.
And where do you all see the space economy in terms of maturity? I'll let anyone jump in who wants to start there.
So just at the beginning, we're really just getting started. There's so much more we can do, and we can do better. And I'm sure the other guys, that's probably a big part of why you guys are all in this, I'm sure. There's so much.
I agree with James that we have a long ways to go. However, that's not to diminish the global space economy, $350 billion market. It is large. And I think a lot of the airtime goes to space tourism, which is only $1 billion of this $350 billion market. So what remains of this $349 billion? We use space every day. I use it to navigate me to my destination. I use it when I turn on the television, listen to the radio, swipe my ATM. That's where space is at the moment. It's a massive infrastructure for a lot of help on Earth. And I think what's exciting next is sort of what Blair was saying, space for space's benefit. This new infrastructure in space, whether it be the moon, but also low Earth orbit, Mars, Venus, beyond, and all of these other entities that we can have an entirely new infrastructure. I really do believe we need to be a multi-planet species, not to give up on Earth, but to help fix the problems we currently face here. A great example is during the Apollo mission, we landed astronauts on the lunar surface and we wanted to take selfies. We wanted to take selfies on the moon. And that optic technology is used in our hospitals, and MRI and CT scanning technology is saving lives every day. So I look forward to all of the other benefits of space exploration next?
Yeah, I do believe we are laying that infrastructure layer right now. I think in the next few years, we'll launch more satellites than in the whole history of humanity. And then we'll see the maturity going downstream to how do we really take advantage and exploit what we're collecting from space. And then also, we've been designing for the Falcon 9 to date. Now people are starting to think about we're designing for what flies with the Starship and what that will enable, cislunar economy and beyond. So I think we're just starting.
Yeah, I'd say on the maturity curve, we are teenagers. We're rebellious. We're breaking rules, trying new things. And that's really the most fascinating part, that when you break away from a single source of information and you have a lot of sources of information, learning curve accelerates. And this is what's fascinating about where we're at. Now that there's so many different entrants into the market doing different things, different ways, we will succeed and fail faster and learn quicker.
Tess and Jeff, as investors, what are you looking for in space startups, and what and where are the opportunities here?
Of course, when investing in any company, you look for four main things. You look at the problem the company is solving. 2, its solution. 3, the team, why they're uniquely suitable to solve the problem. And 4, customers, whether they're paying customers or soon to be paying customers. So at a high level, those are the 4 things any investor looks at when investing in any industry or company. Team being always the most important, working with that partner and that entrepreneur, but also the entrepreneur wanting to work with me or Jeff as investors. When it comes to space, though, there's additional nuances that you also want to factor into your consideration. And I'm very excited to hear from Seraphim's perspective, because we're actually co-investors in Inspire Global, the largest multi-sensor or general purpose CubeSat constellation. We have over 80 assets in space, and we track maritime and aviation and weather. Weather we also predict. So what are those nuances when it comes to space? I specifically look for flight heritage. I look for assets in space that have proven their TRL higher, their technology readiness level. I've been so impressed and blown away with the students, entrepreneurs that have launched assets into space with very little capital. And therefore, even if it's a seed or a Series A deal, I really, Series Seed or Series A, I just mean an early stage company. I look for some test that their technology works.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. A team is always the first thing that we look at. Do they have the ability to execute on the plan that they're presenting us? One of the things that we spend a lot of time on are technology and what is the moat that they can build around their company, also known as the differentiation. So where do they have their competitive edge, technologically speaking? And a lot of that does come back to de-risking it very early on, as Tess mentioned. So, oftentimes with early stage companies, and that's not exactly a luxury that they have. So we really look to, as Tess mentioned, see how they've taken steps to de-risk that pre-launch as much as they possibly can.
And a follow-up, Tess and Jeff, are there things you absolutely avoid, and if so, why?
Sure. No, please.
I answered the other one first. This one's, sure. We'll flip it this time.
Thank you. I think one of the things that's a little bit challenging for us to look at currently are kind of what I consider the beyond space category. Things that are, deep space exploration, missions to Mars, asteroid mining. And it's not because I don't believe in their feasibility or I think I know better, but it's simply due to the structure of the fund that I'm currently at that has a 10-year life cycle. So there are some disparities in what, is interesting and what I can invest in, unfortunately.
I agree. The aerospace engineer and me, as excited as I am about these ideas and aspirations, I got to put on the venture investor hat that my LPs need a shorter return on their investment. And this my thing that I guess I don't look for a red flag or is not unique to space. I think ethics and entrepreneurship is not discussed enough, and really making sure that you're thinking about the broader impact of your company. ESG is becoming all company companies are being held accountable to this, and I think private ones should be as well, and the importance of their impact onto the world.
Great point. Blair and James, we'd love to hear more about your respective areas of specialization. Blair, why don't you kick off?
Oh, great. Yeah, so we're focused on solving the problem of the lunar data tsunami. Because there are so many private commercial sensors going to the surface of the moon, this fundamentally changes how the global citizenry has access to data. For a long time, it's been public and posted by NASA and ESA because the taxpayers funded those missions. Now these are privately funded. The data that's generated from these will be privately available. And so our Moon Hacker intelligence platform is there to handle this private data and make it commercially available to industries that are looking at the continent, wondering how to monetize it.
Great. James?
And we'll also be sending our own sensors as well to help create the private lunar data tsunami.
Fantastic. James?
Yeah, so Dawn Aerospace is a space transportation company. What we're trying to do is create some pretty fundamental shifts in in technology to create new ways of getting to space, moving around in space, and then getting back, the things we develop in space, getting them back to Earth. And we're really focused on doing this in a much more fundamentally scalable manner, much more sustainable manner, and a much more accessible manner. So we use extreme high reusability vehicles to get to space. That just creates a total in how that's done. And then we also build extreme high performance propulsion systems for transportation in space. And the reason we attack both of these is we identified very early on there's some pretty big barriers to entry, and there's some pretty big issues with how both these aspects of space transportation are done. Everybody really focuses on launch, getting to space, and I suppose that's in many ways the most exciting part of it. But it was pretty clear to us early on, actually, to really leverage your assets in space, being able to move around in space and have high performance propulsion is actually extremely important as well. So, and both of those have got some pretty core issues limitations with how they're presented. And so we are building the technology to fundamentally shift that.
And what do you all see as the major obstacles or impediments to the growth in this market? Any of you?
Failure.
So elaborate. What kind of failure?
Yeah, so looking at the moon, naturally. China is executing 2 missions simultaneously successfully. Yet India had a failure just before touchdown. Israel had a failure just before touchdown. And you can see the response by other industries as to those successes and those failures. And the more successes, the more excitement, the more that barrier to access is reduced. So that's really important that everybody put their best foot forward in getting to the surface of the moon successfully and often.
Respectfully challenging James potentially, and I'm looking for his response. I still think it's access to space. I still think we don't have the transportation infrastructure established to get there and back cheaply and quickly. I mean, hey, Bessemer has invested in Rocket Lab, which last year was the second most frequently launched U.S. rocket behind SpaceX. And in the course of our life, we've launched 19 times, deploying over 100 satellites in space. But like SpaceX and Rocket Lab aren't enough. That's just like not enough options for all of the assets that need to get into space. Not only assets, but people. May of last year, in the middle of the pandemic, there was a monumental moment. In May of 2020, it was the first time in nearly a decade, we launched American astronauts from the American soil from an American-made private rocket. When Doug and Bob went to the International Space Station off of a SpaceX Falcon 9 Dragon crew since the shuttle. And for the past decade, we've been depending on the Russian launch vehicle. So I still think we need to continue to lower the barrier and make it easier, quicker, and cheaper to get assets into space.
Another barrier that I think we should. Oh, sorry, please.
Sorry. I didn't see the challenge in that. So I certainly agree that accessibility is a huge thing that we can will totally change things if we can improve that more. And certainly, that's one of our biggest, our most core pillars is increasing accessibility to space. Then I think other challenges of things aren't really a huge part of aerospace right now. Sustainability is something that people don't really talk about so much, similar to Tess's point about ESG and so on. And right now, and historically, no one's cared because it hasn't mattered. It's been all about performance. When performance, that's driving. But there's more satellites in space, as there's higher congestion, as there's more demand, sustainability is going to become important. And also on Earth, as we launch more, the way we launch, the way those launch vehicles interact with the rest of society, whether it's airspace, whether it's infrastructure, all those sorts of factors, they will also have to be done much more sustainably. So I think that's a huge challenge for the future.
One of the hurdles I'd like to see lowered is funding. I think an incredibly small amount of funding goes to space startups for the size of the industry that they're in. A lot of that goes to what I consider big, old, and slow prime contractors, and they can often be the gatekeepers. So I would like to see organizations like NASA who are starting to implement more multiple sourcing strategies and bringing that money to startups continue.
So Jeff, you were able to provide there a suggestion on how that obstacle might be able to be overcome, but how are other great startups navigating those obstacles and challenges that you all are seeing?
They're oftentimes going at it alone, early stage with contracts, through things like the SIVR program. And so I do think, many of the primes still stay gatekeepers to things like programs of record later on that can go on to fund and scale a lot of these companies. Somehow evolving that relationship between prime contractors, or actually devolving what a prime contractor is and deconstructing it. That's what a lot of companies like SpaceX, or even companies outside of space like Anduril or those two. Sorry, blanked out.
I'd love to hear from all of you about why you're personally bullish about the space economy. I think, Tess, you mentioned at the beginning that right now a $350 billion market, how big can it get? And where are you seeing this? Blair, why don't we start with you?
Did you say me, Catherine? Sorry, I don't want to jump. Okay. Yeah, I'm bullish on this market because I realized what it would mean for us to have access to the moon, and not just to survive, but to thrive there. And that there are so many benefits for all of the population that it has to be gone after. And if I can help with my team make missions more successful, more viable, that's what we're going to do.
What does that end picture look like? What does it look like to thrive on the moon?
It looks like it's another continent. As easy as it is to fly across the Pacific or the Atlantic, it's as easy to get to the moon. And that commerce is flowing with very little friction, that there are economic benefits on larger orders than could be achieved just staying on our own planet.
Interesting. Okay, great. James, how about from your perspective? Why are you personally bullish about the space economy?
Really, we just keep seeing increasing opportunity there. And, when we started dawn, this would be a pretty big, hard problem, and it certainly has been. And, most days, things are harder than you initially thought, and that's, part and parcel of a startup in many ways. And that, it's getting harder. But every day, with the opportunity that we see and the feedback from our customers and the excitement in their eyes when you sort of tell them, this is what we're going to build for you, the amount that they're like, whoa, like I need that my life sort of thing, that sort of feedback and that sort of response and that sort of interaction with the other people that you're going to work with in this is so encouraging. It sort of means, man, that new big problem that I found today, that doesn't compare to the opportunity and the capability we'll build. So like we got to double down on this as quick as we can, because so much opportunity and such exciting capability as well. So, yeah.
And Tess and Jeff, how big can this? How do you size this market?
I think I'm going to put on my aerospace engineer hat, and then I'll put on my investor hat. The aerospace engineer in me imagines a future where we travel to space for the frequency in which we currently travel in an aircraft. And it won't just be billionaires taking selfies in space. It really will be for the continent Blair imagines. The investor hat. taking the aerospace engineer off for a second, although I like to wear both at the same time. The investor hat, I think something that was holding back the industry historically was the lack of liquidity events, the lack of exits in the space industry. There were only a handful of private VC-backed companies that returned investment to their VCs and therefore LPs. And it wasn't because a lot failed, it was just there wasn't a ton of VC investment before really Google acquired Skybox in 2014. This year is a huge liquidity inflection point for the industry. There are about, a dozen space companies that are going to be public this year that are going public via SPAC. And Jeff and I can talk about two. Well, I can talk about two. And Jeff, remind me, are you guys investors in Rocket Lab also?
We are. But,
just Spire.
We have a few other SPACs.
Okay, you guys have okay, we can talk about your other SPACs too. But my two space companies, Rocket Lab and Spire, both announced their SPAC mergers on March 1st. Rocket Lab Vector and Spire Global with Navsite. And there's many that Jeff can now fill in also. So by the end of this year, there will be a paved path for other space companies to follow in Rocket Lab's footsteps. And I am particularly interested in investing and partnering with those companies. But I think it's going to be massive and really helpful for the industry, specifically VC funding in the industry.
So the way I like to think about it is twofold. I think there's one trend that I'm noticing, which is we're moving a lot of infrastructure that's terrestrial today to space, and that's out of care for the environment. There's a lot of things we can do, and we moved our telecommunications today. Soon we'll have manufacturing. We'll have our data centers in space. There's a lot of good reasons why that'll happen, and these are absolutely massive markets. So, I mean, I would not be surprised if we're in the many trillions of dollars in the space economy in the not too distant future.
Super interesting. Is there anything else that each of you would want to share with our listeners and investors before we open it up for questions?
Well, I'm really excited about seeing other industries develop their space strategies more and more. You know, how is it Budweiser is on the International Space Station figuring out how to fertilize crops? That's fascinating. What's Coca-Cola thinking? What's Nestle thinking? You know, how did these industries start incorporating space into their everyday operations? That's where things get really exciting.
Yes, similarly for us, that's part of what we've sort of observed as the biggest opportunities is creating a system and a technology and a methodology that allows a whole bunch of really big players in the global economy to enter space who haven't previously, because to Tess's point, accessibility is just inadequate. Cost is prohibitive, whatever the reason may be. We really see that there's a huge amount that we can, do in space, and that's what we enable.
Okay, well, let's see if there are any questions from our investor community. Please go ahead and click on the raise hand button to ask your questions, and we'll bring you up on stage. And that raise hand is over on the right-hand side of your screen.
By the way, James, just so that you know, I think your internet's coming in and out, so we're losing you sometimes. I want to hear every awesome you say.
Looks like we have a raised hand here. Let's bring them up. That's Florin.
Oh yes, this is a rare occasion, so I would love to actually hear even a snapshot, because I'm sure it's one of education for all of us. I think Blair alluded to, but could you touch upon space economy, direct impact on other industries and verticals, like the chain effect, like material science and all of that?
Hey, I can provide three very tangible ones. Spire's 80 constellation satellite in space directly impacts aviation, maritime, and weather. We track ships, we track planes, and then we'll predict weather. Those are three massive markets that are getting help from assets in space. I mean, not only getting help, you can imagine the decisions that, let's say, an airline needs to make when flying from Florin. You're in Europe right now, right? Where are you?
Correct. Yeah.
Like, if you want to come visit me in San Francisco, the plane's got to figure out where path to travel, and Spire's data is helping it travel most efficiently, so it doesn't have to burn as much fuel. Weather, I mean, that's that combination of information. You can also imagine other sensors in space can help agriculture. The soil moisture sensor in the soil moisture on a farm, and the sensor in space can help. I mean, hyperspectral imaging, synthetic aperture imaging. There's all of these sensors that are just really useful to, I think, every industry can have some help in space. I mean, Blair did touch on it with like Coca-Cola and these logos. So curious what those examples are, Blair.
Yeah, another example is there are things you can grow in low gravity that you can't grow here, like crystalline structures. And crystalline structures in and themselves have a couple of different advantages: frequency modulation, drug efficacy. So there are things that you cannot do here that you can only do in space. So let's get to space and get those things done.
Very cool. We have a question in the chat. Using dedicated constellation of satellites for over-the-air software updates for vehicles currently in embryonic team building stage, what are your thoughts on raising seed round from a corporate VC versus a traditional VC?
I'm happy to jump in, as I've worked on both sides. I think corporate VCs are great so long as there's a strategic aspect to it for the company that's raising money from them. They are often helpful in terms of making headway on development as a potential customer, reseller, licensor, etc. I think that's oftentimes when you're more at the commercialization stage of your business. Earlier on, I think the private capital from a VC who has experience in scaling a company is probably more appropriate.
Very helpful. Well, I'd like to thank you all so much for a very interesting panel.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye.